Welcome back. I had the second lab for the poker lab complete. This is lab 3 in the syllabus. The first one we did, we had card, hand, and deck, and the enumerators for a card in hand. And it just did 5 card stud. In other words, I deal 5 cards, I evaluate 5 cards, done. There's no variables in there. The lab 3 was to do jokers. And I thought, since I'm doing jokers and it's sort of close to the same logic for wilds, I decided to do wilds at the same time. So let's take a look to see what changed. First things first, E card number, the enumerator for E card number, didn't change. We still have 5 cards in the hand. That stays the same. Hand strength. I made a couple of changes here. Well, at least one change here. I added 5 of a kind as a new hand. So just a new hand for hand strength. For rank, I added Joker as a new rank. Now, the Joker card is a little bit different because the Joker card is like a brand new card in the deck. If I ask for a deck and a joke with one Joker, I'd actually get back 53 cards, 52 cards for the regular deck, and an extra card for the Joker. So I want to sort of separate that from getting confused with any other rank. So I added it as a 99. I could have added it as a 15, but I'll know that 99 means Joker. It's just like a special card. Same thing with suit. I added Joker as a new suit. I called that 99 as well. Okay. Now I have card. Let's start with the regular classes. Card changed a little bit. I added a new attribute called wild. So what the idea behind this is, if I'm trying to make a card wild that's not a Joker, just a regular, let's say twos are wild, I want to flip the indicator for that particular card, or in this case, all 4 twos, to wild. By default, it's going to create it as false for wild. So what I'm going to do is, if I have a wild, I'm going to deal out the deck and then reset the wild indicator for each card that I want wild, and I'll show you how that's going to work later. I've got an overloaded constructor now for card, one where I'm passing in wild, and I'm setting the wild to whatever I passed in. Nothing else changed. Except for, excuse me, I have a getter and setter for wild. Okay, deck. Deck changed quite a bit. So this code existed before. The deck constructor existed. There's a minor change. Shuffle cards I decided to make into its own procedure. So if you look at shuffle cards, that was just the collections.shuffle. So I pushed it in its own procedure. The reason why is because when I add jokers, I'm going to be adding jokers to an existing deck, and I don't want the jokers to be seated in the first two. Let's say there were 2 jokers in the first 2 positions. So let's take a look at the new constructor for deck. For the new constructor for deck, I'm going to pass in the number of jokers that I want in the deck. I'm going to call the default constructor this, which is going to call this method, and it's going to create an array of cards with 52 cards. In other words, build me a regular deck and shuffle it. Then I'm going to add a new Joker card for one for each one that I pass in. So if I ask for if the number of Jokers was 2, I'd have 52 cards plus 2 more cards in this loop. If there were 3 Jokers, I'd have 3 Jokers. If there were 10 Jokers, I'd have 10 Jokers. And then I shuffle the cards again. This is the reason why this was pulled out. Okay. If you call this constructor, it's got to be the first line in the constructor. You can't add cards and then call this. It won't like that. Okay. Next constructor I have is the number of jokers stays the same. In other words, this code is the same thing as this code. Okay. And an array of wild cards. Now, I got a choice here. Instead of calling this constructor, I could have called that constructor, couldn't I? I could have said, instead of this, no parentheses, I could have said this, and then got rid of this. Same idea. In other words, this is going to call this. I hate to say this. Is going to call this, which is going to add the jokers in. And here we are. I'll stay with this. I like this change. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in an array of cards that I'm going to consider wild cards. So if I want twos wild, I'm going to pass an array of 4 cards: 2 clubs, 2 hearts, 2 diamonds, 2 spades. If I said one-eyed jacks are wild, it's going to be whatever. There's 2 one-eyed jacks, whatever those 2 one-eyed jacks are. There'll be 2 cards in the array. So what I do for here is I say, give me all the cards that's in the deck. So for each card that's in the deck that's drawn here, loop through them, and then loop through the list of cards that I sent in. And if this card matches this card, make it wild. That's the idea. It sets that wild indicator for that given card to true. And then I shuffle the cards again. So if I call the deck as normal, 52 cards, no wilds. If I call the deck with 1, it's going to be 52 cards plus a joker. And if I call the deck with either jokers or cards, or an array of cards, I'm going to get either 52 or 52 plus the number of jokers. If I called number of jokers as 0 and I passed in 3, let's say 3 wild cards, there'll still be 52 cards in the deck. 3 of those cards will be wild. And that's what this logic is going to do. So I've got my deck constructor. I don't think anything else changed in deck other than refactoring the shuffle card method. That stays the same. Okay, let me close everything so we can talk about hand. Hand's a little bit tricky. Here's hand. Now what I got to do with hand is, before with hand, I called the hand constructor and I blindly got back 5 cards. Right? And those 5 cards were the 5 cards in the hand. The best possible hand you can have with those 5 cards was the 5 cards that you got drawn. In other words, if I got dealt 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in whatever suit, let's say they were all different suits, the best hand I could have is a straight, because there's only one possible combination. It's a combin 5, 5. So I'd have one hand. In this case, because I'm dealing with jokers and or wilds, I've got to explode the hand, if you will. So in other words, let's say I'm dealt 5 cards. If one of those cards is a joker, it doesn't matter which position it's in, it's got to explode out to all 52 possible cards. If there's 2 jokers, it's got to explode out for 52 possible cards for each one of those positions. Alright, so what am I talking about? After, in the hand constructor, which is somewhere around here, here's the hand constructor. In the hand constructor, I build the hand. And when I'm here, I'm going to have 5 cards in the hand. Some could be jokers, some could be wild. So when I'm sitting here, some are jokers, some are wild, some are not. There's a case where there's no jokers or wild, you only have one hand. I call handled jokers and wilds. This procedure, handled jokers and wilds. It's going to take an array list of hands, and it's going to add the hand that I'm dealt. In other words, the 5 cards, whether they're jokers or wilds, and it's going to add that to player hand. Alright, from there, I'm going to explode the hand. I've got a procedure called explode hand. I pass in the player hand and the substitute card number, which is counted up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, okay, let's back this up for a second. For every card in the hand, I'm gonna run this. So if there's 5 cards in the hand, I'll call this explode hand method 5 times. It looks at the first position, checks to see if it's a wild. If it is, build 52 combinations of that and put it back into the player's hand array. If the second position is wild, again, 52 cards, put it back in the player's hand array. The explode hand, let's take a look what explode hand does. Here it is. Explode hand, I take the array list of hands, and I'm checking to see whether I have a joker or the card is wild. If the card is a joker or a wild, for the joker card, I substitute that card for the 52 possible cards. Here I am looking at the card, and what I want to do is make sure that I'm not resubstituting a card that I already hit. That makes sense? In other words, if I'm on 2, I'm asking a recording if that makes sense, but if I'm on card number 2, it won't try to resubstitute card number 2. It will only substitute it once. Okay, so when I'm done with explode hand, when I'm sitting right here, I've got all the possible combinations of all the possible hands with jokers and wilds in an array called player's hands. Okay, so after I have that array, I call the evaluate method for each possible hand in that array, and I evaluate each single hand. When I'm here, all the hands in the array list of hands are evaluated. Some maybe royal flushes, some are pairs, they're all evaluated. This line of code here takes all the possible hands and sorts them by the combination, by the hand strength, by the high card, by the low card, by the kicker, to figure out which is the best hand. Whichever hand sorts to the top is my best hand. Now, I added one thing in hand called, and I'll show you what it looks like, called natural. Natural. So a natural is going to be set to 0, excuse me, it's going to be set to 1 if it's a true natural hand. In other words, if it's a 3 of a kind without a joker or without a wild. I'm going to set it to 0 if it has anything to do, if there's any wilds in the hand that made that hand a wild, that's going to be a 0. So I added that also as part of the sort right after hand strength. So it sorts hand strength and then natural card and then high hand and then low hand and then kicker. Just so we're clear, I'll push this in the same order. Okay. So a royal flush that's a natural will sort higher than a royal flush that's built with a joker. A 3 of a kind that's natural will sort higher than a 3 of a kind that's with a joker, and so forth. All right. So now I have the set natural, which sets whether or not set natural is pretty easy. All this does is it loops through the given hands and sees if there's a joker or a wild in the hand, and if it is, it's 0, meaning there's a joker. All right. Last but not least, whatever the get 0 hand is, the 0 hand from this sort means this is the best hand, and it doesn't matter if it's a tie because I'm looking at my own hands. Whatever the best hand is, I'm going to set the best hand strength, high hand, low hand, and kicker. I don't need to set natural again. That's already set. All right. Last but not least, if I look at these two lists. Now, in hand, when we dealt with just regular 5-card star without wilds or jokers, the possibility of having different hands was 1. In other words, whatever hand I was dealt, that's the best possible hand. Now I have a case where the hand I'm dealt is not the same thing as the best possible hand because of all the substitutions. This hand, cards in hand, will never change. This hand is what it actually evaluated to. So this hand will be the one with jokers and 2s or whatever the wilds are, and this one will evaluate and will have the cards for the best possible substitution. When we start to do UI, you're not going to show that your joker really substituted for a 4. You're still going to show the joker in the UI, but behind the scenes that it didn't actually sort as a joker, it's just another 4. All right, so let's go back to here. How do you call this? Now, you have to make the class that's going to call this as simple as possible, because remember, at the end, I'm going to have the UI, the GUI, start to execute the engine. So I'm not going to give a lot of logic to the GUI to figure out who wins and hand strength and all that. Let's take a look at play hand. This is as simple as it gets. I've got 3 different kinds of calls I can make. The one is what we've seen before. Regular 5-card stud, I call a deck with no constructor, I call a hand. That's going to sort out to some hand, that's going to evaluate to some hand. With no jokers, there's only one possible best hand, and that'll be the hand that you're dealt. The next one, joker with 5 cards. Okay, I'm calling the joker deck. I'm sending 2 in, so I want 2 jokers built with that deck. This deck will come back with 54 cards. That one, this hand, now could possibly be either 1 card or 1 possible hand, 52 possible hands, or 2504. Make sure I got this right. If there happens to be 2 jokers that you're called, 52 times 52 is 2704. Excuse me. I'm either going to have 1 or 52 or 2704. This one, where I'm building, now this one's a little trickier. I'm seeding this on purpose. I'm saying my wilds are going to be all 2s, the 2 of clubs, diamonds, hearts, and spades. And then I'm calling the wild deck. I'm calling deck with wilds array that I set. So this hand is either going to come back with 1 hand. I'm going to pull my calculator over here. 1 hand, or 52 times 52, 2704 hand. I take that back. 1 hand, 52 hands, 2704 hands, 140,608 hands, or 7.3 million hands. I know it sounds crazy, but if I'm dealt all 4 wilds and a 5th non-wild card, that's how many different combinations I have. 7,311,000. Okay, let's take a look to see how this runs. If I run it, it's thinking. I'll try that again. If I run it, actually, there's no Are there any outputs in this? Let's see. Oh, there was. Okay. So